In the shadows of the Carpathian Mountains, a prince's final scream was swallowed by legend. Vladislav III of Wallachia was not felled by sword or poisoned cup, but by the flaying knife, his skin stripped as his enemies watched. Yet his story is more than horror. It is the tale of a land torn between empires, of betrayal masquerading as loyalty, and of a man whose name was buried beneath the darker fame of another, Dracula. In the 15th century, Wallachia was less a kingdom than a battlefield carved between greater powers. Nestled between the Kingdom of Hungary to the west and the Ottoman Empire to the south, it was a frontier soaked in blood. Whoever wore its crown rarely sat in peace. The throne itself was a seat of daggers. To rule Wallachia meant to balance tribute, alliances, and treachery, often at the cost of one's life. The land was shaped by geography as much as by politics. The Carpathian Mountains loomed over its villages, while the Danube River marked its lifeline and its danger. From the Hungarian lords came pressure to hold the border for Christendom, to be the buffer that shielded Europe from the Ottoman tide. From the Ottoman sultans came demands for tribute, hostages, and obedience. Caught between the two, Wallachian princes could not afford mistakes. Boyar nobles, the powerful aristocracy, turned this fragile balance into their own game. They pledged allegiance to whoever promised them safety or wealth, betraying one prince for another in dizzying cycles. In this world, assassination and usurpation were not aberrations but political currency. It was into this maelstrom that Vladislav III was born. His very birth carried the weight of instability. He was not heir to peace or prosperity, but to a throne soaked with the blood of his predecessors. From the moment of his youth, he would have understood that loyalty in Wallachia was a myth, and survival required sharpness of mind and ruthlessness of hand. Wallachia, in the mid-15th century, was not just a place, it was a crucible, forging men into either tyrants or corpses, and Vladislav's destiny would prove which he would become. Vladislav III came from the Draculeshti branch of the House of Basarab, a dynasty notorious for its fractures. The Basarab line itself had once united Wallachia, but by the 1400s it had splintered into rival factions, the Draculeshti and the Daneshti. These two branches, both claiming legitimate descent, fought endlessly for the crown, dragging foreign powers into their quarrels. From childhood, Vladislav would have grown up in a climate where betrayal was as familiar as bread. Brothers turned against brothers, cousins murdered cousins, and nobles pledged loyalty only to the strongest hand. To be born into the Draculeshti line was not to inherit security, but to inherit suspicion and daggers aimed at one's back. The family ties that should have protected him became snares. A father could be dethroned by his brother. A nephew might rise at the expense of his uncle. In such a world, blood was less a bond than a liability. For Vladislav, even family gatherings would have been tense stages of rivalry, where a smile could hide conspiracy. Compounding this danger was the constant interference of Hungary and the Ottomans. Princes of Wallachia were not raised as free monarchs, but as pawns trained to dance to foreign tunes. One season, a prince might owe fealty to the Hungarian king, only to be demanded as a vassal by the Ottoman sultan the next. The young Vladislav learned quickly that survival was not about honor, but about choosing the right master, until even that choice could betray him. Thus, his upbringing was steeped in contradiction. He was trained as a ruler, yet constantly undermined by relatives. He was called a prince, yet treated as a hostage of greater powers. This tension marked his character, wary, calculating, and ever aware that his destiny was not to be written in peace, but in blood. In the tapestry of Wallachian history, Vladislav III's life was entwined with rivals who cast shadows larger than his own. Chief among them were Vlad II Dracula and his infamous son, Vlad III Dracula, better known to the world as Vlad Tepes, the Impaler. This family rivalry created confusion for later chroniclers, who struggled to distinguish one Vlad from another. Yet for Vladislav, the distinctions were painfully clear. These men were not kin to be embraced, but wolves circling the same fragile throne. Vlad II Dracula, once ruler of Wallachia, secured power through a delicate balance between the Hungarians and the Ottomans. He bore the title Dracul, or the Dragon, as a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order sworn to defend Christendom. But his loyalties were as shifting as the tides. When convenient, he paid tribute to the Ottoman sultans. When pressed, he pledged allegiance to the Hungarian kings. His reign ended violently in 1447, leaving his sons Vlad Dracula and Radu the Handsome at the mercy of foreign captors. Vlad Dracula, hardened by years as a hostage in the Ottoman court, emerged with a resolve forged in fire. Where Vladislav's upbringing had taught him suspicion, Dracula's had instilled cruelty. He would become infamous for his brutal methods, impaling enemies by the thousands. But in the mid-15th century, before the legend eclipsed the man, he was simply another claimant to the Wallachian throne, a rival who could not be ignored. For Vladislav, the tragedy lay in timing. He rose to prominence just as Dracula began to sharpen his ambitions. Their rivalry was not merely personal but dynastic, a clash between the drenched branch Vladislav represented and the Draculeshti line that Dracula embodied. Nobles, always eager to back a winner, shifted between them. Each battle was not just a fight for the crown, but a referendum on which branch of the Basarab house would rule. In this struggle, Vladislav found himself overshadowed. He lacked the ferocity that would make Dracula legendary, yet he was far from weak. He was a cautious ruler, caught between extremes, too pragmatic to inspire fear like Dracula, yet too ruthless to command loyalty like a statesman. His tragedy was not that he lacked ambition, but that his rivals defined the narrative more completely than he ever could. By the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire was the storm on every Wallachian horizon. Expanding relentlessly under Sultan Murad II and later Mehmed II, the Ottomans had transformed from a regional power into a world-shaking empire. Their armies pressed northward, crossing the Danube, their fleets menacing the Black Sea. For small states like Wallachia, survival meant submission. The Ottomans did not necessarily demand outright conquest, at least, not immediately. Instead, they perfected the art of vassalage. Wallachian princes were expected to pay tribute in gold and grain, and more bitterly, in human lives. Noble sons were sent to Adrianople or Constantinople as hostages, raised in the Ottoman court as guarantees of their father's obedience. Failure to comply could mean invasion, devastation, or deposition. For Vladislav III, this meant ruling not as an independent sovereign, but as a man in chains. His freedom measured in the Sultan's tolerance. Each decision, whether to ally with Hungary, whether to collect taxes, whether to march his armies, had to be weighed against the likelihood of Ottoman reprisal. His throne was less a seat of power than a precarious perch above a collapsing floor. And yet, resisting the Ottomans was equally dangerous. Hungarian kings, eager to keep the frontier intact, pressed Wallachian princes to defy the Sultan. They provided arms, gold, and promises. But promises were fragile currency. More than once, Hungary abandoned Wallachian rulers when Ottoman retaliation came. To stand with Hungary was to risk betrayal. To stand with the Ottomans was to risk being branded a traitor to Christendom. This impossible balance defined Vladislav's reign. He could not appease both masters, yet he could not survive without one. Each tribute paid to the Sultan deepened Hungarian suspicion. Each alliance with Hungary sharpened Ottoman wrath. Wallachia became a pawn on the chessboard of empires, and Vladislav himself, a player doomed to lose no matter the move. In this climate, betrayal was inevitable. Nobles whispered of his allegiances, accusing him of weakness or duplicity depending on their own loyalties. To the Ottomans, he was never submissive enough. To the Hungarians, never defiant enough. And so, step by step, the noose of geopolitics tightened around him, setting the stage for his downfall. The death of Vlad II Dracula in 1447 opened the gates of chaos in Wallachia. His murder, engineered by Hungarian forces and their Wallachian allies, left a void that could only be filled by another ambitious prince. Into that void stepped Vladislav III. His ascension was not the result of popular acclaim, nor of a peaceful succession. It was born in the smoke of betrayal and the stain of blood. Hungary, eager to install a pliant ruler on the volatile frontier, looked to Vladislav. For them, he was a convenient tool, a noble from the Basarab line, capable enough to project authority, but dependent on Hungarian support to maintain power. To the Hungarians, this arrangement promised stability. To Vladislav, it was an opportunity, yet one laced with poison. His rise to power was tainted from the beginning. To accept Hungary's backing meant aligning himself with the very forces that had engineered Vlad II Dracula's assassination. It meant betraying fellow Wallachians, kin by dynasty if not by loyalty. The throne he gained was a fragile gift, resting on the blade of Hungarian swords. Once enthroned, Vladislav faced the daunting task of legitimizing his rule. Nobles divided between Hungarian sympathizers and Ottoman loyalists eyed him with suspicion. He distributed privileges to secure loyalty, but gifts bred resentment as much as gratitude. For every ally he gained, an enemy emerged, whispering of his dependence on foreign powers. To To consolidate power, he had to walk a narrow path. He could not reject Hungary outright, for they had placed him on the throne. Yet he could not fully embrace them, for doing so would alienate his people and provoke Ottoman intervention. His position was precarious, like a man balancing on a blade sharpened by two empires. Still, for a time, Vladislav held the crown. His reign, though fragile, demonstrated the resilience of a man determined to survive. Yet the seeds of his downfall had already been planted, for another Vlad, forged in captivity and cruelty, was waiting in the shadows to claim the same throne. The return of Vlad III Dracula to Wallachia marked the beginning of a confrontation that history would immortalize. Unlike Vladislav, whose reign was defined by compromise and fragile alliances, Dracula returned, hardened, relentless, and ruthless. Backed by Ottoman training and scarred by years of hostage life, he carried both vengeance and ambition in equal measure. The rivalry between Vladislav III and Vlad Tepes was more than a contest between two men. It was a clash of two visions for Wallachia, each shaped by the foreign masters they had served. Vladislav represented the Hungarian-backed drenched faction, cautious and tied to Western influence. Dracula, by contrast, embodied the Draculeshti line, with its Ottoman scars and its taste for absolute brutality. Their feud was a dynastic war, played on an international stage. Each man gathered supporters. Hungarian nobles rallied behind Vladislav, while many disillusioned Wallachians, weary of compromise, looked to Dracula's promise of strength. To some, Dracula's cruelty was preferable to weakness. Terror, after all, could unify a land where loyalty was scarce. The conflict was inevitable. Both claimed legitimacy, both claimed the right to rule, and both saw the other as an obstacle to survival. Their rivalry was a mirror of the larger struggle between Hungary and the Ottomans, compressed into the fragile body of Wallachia. What set Dracula apart, however, was his willingness to embrace terror as a weapon. Where Vladislav sought to govern through alliances, Dracula sought to dominate through fear. His infamous methods of impalement became more than punishments. They were political theater, designed to cow nobles and enemies alike into submission. Against such ferocity, Vladislav's pragmatism seemed almost timid. As the tide of power shifted, Vladislav found himself cornered. His careful balancing act collapsed under the weight of Dracula's relentless ambition. The rivalry that had defined their lives would culminate not in compromise, but in blood. For in Wallachia, only one Vlad could rule. In 1456, the fragile balance of Wallachia finally shattered. Vlad Tepes returned with an army determined to reclaim his father's throne, and Vladislav III found himself facing the most formidable challenge of his reign. The confrontation was not simply a clash of two princes. It was the collision of rival dynasties, foreign interests, and two very different visions of power. The battle was fierce and decisive. Vladislav, backed by Hungarian allies and loyal nobles, sought to defend his crown through conventional means, marshalling troops, fortifying positions, and relying on diplomacy to hold wavering nobles in line. Yet against him stood Vlad Tepes, who fought not only with soldiers but with terror itself. The mere mention of Dracula's name struck fear into friend and foe alike. His reputation for cruelty preceded him, and men often surrendered at the thought of what capture might bring. In the summer campaign, Vlad Tepes's forces pressed their advantage. His brutality demoralized opponents, while his calculated strategies dismantled Vladislav's defenses. By late summer, Vladislav's forces faltered. He was betrayed by nobles who judged Dracula the stronger horse to back, abandoning him on the field. The moment of betrayal sealed his fate. Captured alive, Vladislav was delivered into the hands of his rival. In a land where loyalty was a myth and survival demanded cruelty, his capture was almost inevitable. To fall in battle might have offered him honor, but instead, he was left breathing an ominous gift in the hands of a man like Vlad Tepes. Thus ended Vladislav's reign. Not in triumph, not in quiet exile, but in chains, with the shadow of Dracula looming over him. His destiny now lay in the cruelty of a man whose very name would become synonymous with terror. Legends tell us that Vladislav III did not die quickly. According to chronicles whispered in monasteries and passed down in folklore, he was flayed alive, his skin stripped from his body while he still breathed. Whether this account is literal truth or symbolic exaggeration, it captures the essence of his downfall, the deliberate erasure of his dignity, the reduction of a prince to something less than human. In medieval thought, flaying was the ultimate punishment. To strip the skin was to strip identity itself, leaving not just a corpse, but an absence, a hollow form. It symbolized humiliation beyond death, ensuring that the victim would be remembered not for his deeds, but for his degradation. For a prince like Vladislav, who had fought for recognition in a land torn by dynastic rivalries, this fate was more than cruelty. It was obliteration. The act also served a political purpose. By subjecting Vladislav to such a fate, Vlad Tepes sent a message that no rival could challenge him and survive with honor intact. It was terror made flesh, a spectacle designed to bind nobles through fear. Where Vladislav had relied on fragile alliances, Dracula relied on the theater of brutality. And in this theater, Vladislav played the role of warning. Yet behind the horror lies a deeper tragedy. Vladislav's death, whether truly by flaying or by some other grim method, reflects the brutal calculus of survival in 15th century Wallachia. Princes were not men but pawns, and their bodies became symbols in games far larger than themselves. His suffering was less about personal vengeance than about the necessity of power, to terrify, to dominate, to erase rivals completely. In the silence after his ordeal, what remained was not a legacy of rule, but a legend of cruelty. Vladislav, once a prince, became a ghostly figure in history, a man remembered not for his life, but for the skin he lost. Vladislav III's death was swallowed almost entirely by the legend of Vlad Tepes. History books remember the impaler with lurid fascination, his cruelty elevated into myth, while Vladislav became a footnote if he was mentioned at all. His reign, brief and unstable, lacked the spectacle that captured chroniclers' pens. Yet in the Carpathian valleys, whispers lingered of the prince whose skin was taken from him, a ghostly reminder that even forgotten men could haunt the living. Folklore turned his ordeal into a cautionary tale. To peasants, Vladislav became a symbol of the futility of princely ambition, a man who fought for a throne only to be erased by it. Monks wrote in hushed tones about the punishment of flaying, warning that it represented divine justice as much as human cruelty. His story carried the weight of warning, that betrayal, compromise, and weakness in a land of wolves would end in annihilation. For Wallachia, his memory was political as much as spiritual. Dracula's propagandists had no reason to preserve the dignity of a rival. By emphasizing Vladislav's fate, they reinforced Dracula's dominance. His suffering became propaganda, his absence proof of Dracula's power. And so, even in death, Vladislav served his rival's narrative, his name used only to magnify another's. Yet legends have a way of resisting silence. In villages shadowed by mountains, tales of the flayed prince persisted long after chronicles had forgotten him. Parents warned children of treachery by invoking his name. Travelers whispered prayers when passing places said to bear his blood. Over time, the story of Vladislav became less about who he was, and more about what he represented. The price of being caught between empires, dynasties, and merciless men. In this way, Vladislav achieved a strange form of immortality. Not the glory of a victorious king, not the renown of a conqueror, but the eerie persistence of a ghost. He lingered on the edges of history, faceless and flayed, a reminder that not all rulers are remembered for their deeds, some are remembered only for their suffering. Vladislav III's fate leaves us with questions more unsettling than his death itself. What does honor mean in a land where loyalty is a lie? What value does duty hold when every alliance is poisoned by betrayal? His life reminds us that medieval power was less about justice and more about survival, and survival itself was often impossible. He was not remembered as a wise ruler, nor as a conqueror. Instead, he became a symbol of the futility of compromise, erased by the cruelty of others, and buried beneath the shadow of Dracula. His tragedy is not simply that he was flayed, it is that he was forgotten. In the end, Vladislav's story forces us to confront the truth of his age, that power devoured men whole, and history rarely preserved those who lost.